Welcome to the webcast, Family Engagement and Secondary Transition, Collaboration and Preparation. I'm Tanya Gokita, a Secondary Training Associate at CTI, the Center on Transition Innovations at VCU. CTI was founded in 2013 and is primarily funded by the Virginia Department of Education. Our center provides information, resources, demonstration, and research to generate evidence-based interventions to support youth with disabilities, their families, educators, and communities in the successful transition to their post-secondary lives. Our mission and work is captured within our statewide portal of transition resources, including courses, webcasts, videos, and publications on effective transition practices. We invite you to visit our website, www.centerontransitions.org. Now, I'm excited to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker for today's webcast, Chiquita Seaborn. Chiquita is a doctoral candidate at Hampton University. She currently serves as the Family Engagement Specialist, Special Projects Coordinator in the Department of Special Education and Student Services at the Virginia Department of Education. She supports family engagement initiatives across the Commonwealth and implements evidence-based family engagement practices. Mrs. Seaborn's experience in education spans nearly 2 decades. She has served as a special education teacher, case manager, secondary transition coach, adult education teacher, coordinator of secondary instruction, and coordinator of secondary transition. Mrs. Seaborn's passion for engaging families and students with disabilities led her to collaborate with VDOE and ODU TTAC to host the school division's first Youth and Family Summit. She currently serves as the membership co-chair for the Division on Career Development and Transition. Chiquita, thank you for joining us and for addressing this important topic.
Thank you, Tanya, for that wonderful introduction, as well as VCU's Center on Transition Innovations for allowing this platform today. As Tanya mentioned, the title for today's webcast is Family Engagement and Secondary Transition, Collaboration and Preparation. She also did a wonderful job of telling you who I am, so I will not go over my title again, but you do have that information. I do want to let you know that I am with VDOE's Office of Facilities and Family Engagement. I won't go through our major 4 functions, but I do want you to see that on the screen just so you'll know how we can continue to support you in other endeavors, as well as continue to do webcasts such as this. So family engagement. When we think about family engagement, a researcher that has shown us the how, the why is Dr. Joyce Epstein. And when she talks about family engagement, she mentions that they're partnerships. And you'll see that that's in bold because it's extremely important as we embark on this journey of bringing our families along in this secondary transition work, and we really want them to be fully engaged. We have to think about it as a partnership. And so Dr. Epstein tells us partnerships are not hard work, but they're heart work. Not more work, but it's the work. Not harder work, but smarter. Work to mobilize all of the available resources that will contribute to student success. And that's exactly what we want to do as practitioners. We want to have our families in partnership with us so that our students can have those wonderful outcomes that we know are possible. Also with family engagement now, we do know that our families are very diverse. That's a component of engaging our families. We have to understand the diversity, the complexities, and embrace all of those, and know that all of the cultural capital that our families have actually make them very unique and make them even more equipped to be able to participate in this process and to be engaged in this secondary transition process. As practitioners, you hold the torch. You hold that torch to light the flame, to make this engagement process exciting, to bring them in, to be able to empower them. And we want to ensure that that's happening for all families. When we think about family engagement, I did tell you a little bit at the beginning, Dr. Joyce Epstein, because her work is very prominent in the field. But there are a variety of definitions when you look for family engagement. But there are a couple of things that you will see that are very consistent. So when we are moving from the involvement at the foundational level to more of engaging our families, all of the definitions say it has to be that two-way communication. Not that we're doing something to our families, but we are in partnership with them. So that's a consistent area. Also, to reach the area of engagement, there has to be trust. And that happens in all partnerships. And of course, we want to have that respect, mutual respect. Our families respect us, and then we in turn also respect our families and the values and the beliefs that they bring to the table as well. With the diversity of today's families, we do know that a lot of times the traditional engagement measures, we do have to do some changes. We have to think about things a little different. COVID, the pandemic definitely showed us a lot of that as well. And we're using some non-traditional engagement measures. We're trying to think outside of the box. How can we get this wonderful information to families to help them better understand things like secondary transition? What's the best way to do that? It may not always be that we're bringing them into the school buildings anymore, right? We've learned a lot about technology and access and ensuring that families have access to this information. We also know that to engage all, and all being the key words, that our information has to be presented sometimes in diverse languages, multiple languages, depending on the families that we serve. But we do have to keep that in mind. And then why do we do this work? Why is this important? Why do we want to provide this information to you today? Because it provides that increased student achievement and graduation rates. Family engagement has been shown to increase attendance. And then family engagement has also been shown to increase social emotional skills. So it improves those outcomes for our students, and especially our students with disabilities. So that's why this work is extremely important, and we need to be doing this as practitioners. When we think about our families, we have to just keep in mind, they're their child's first teacher. Any information that we can provide to them, they are the child's first teacher. They can reinforce some of the information that we're sharing, and they can do that at home if we empower them to do that. We also have to approach family engagement from the lens of the family knows the child best, okay? And then all families come to the table, they really want the best for their child. We do have to keep in mind those cultural beliefs, the values, and then during the discussion or communication, collaboration that has to happen in that partnership, we'll learn a lot about the family or the village of supports that some of us refer to. So who's actually involved and who's helping our young people to achieve those goals that we're going to be discussing in that secondary transition planning process? And then as practitioners, always want to learn more. Always want to learn more about, okay, what are your interests? What are your goals? What are the family's goals? And then clearly, we want to ensure that we are checking for understanding when we are engaging our families. Provide that safe space for them to be able to ask questions. If you've just gone over something that's pretty complex, be sure to check for understanding and provide that opportunity for them to have follow-up. And those questions may not come immediately, but it may come a few days later where the family thinks about it and says, you know what, I do have a question. I do have a question about that interagency collaboration, but provide that platform for them to be able to do that. And that increases the engagement with our families. VDOE also reinforces family engagement, and I wanted to share this resource. It comes from the VDOE Inclusive Practices Guide. And you'll see a lot of these points here when we're talking about family and community engagement. So they include community here, but just take a look at this. So in 9.1, we're saying that our families as partners are active members in that decision-making. And then we move up, just like we said, in the actual definition of family engagement, you have to have that two-way communication in there. 9.3, we know what we do is student-centered. We want the students to be at the center of everything that we're doing. And so we have there at 9.3 that our students can help to actually encourage this level of family involvement as well. 9.4, we're going to talk a little more about the empowerment, but for families to be empowered, there has to be opportunities for parent training. How are they going to know what this secondary transition process involves? What are the opportunities that are provided to them so they can know more about this? They can know more about what's to come. And then not only the opportunities, but when. When are those opportunities provided? And then 9.5, of course, opportunities for that community involvement at school and community learning sites. So we've talked just a little bit about family engagement, and we're going to merge the two together a little later in this presentation. But you have a foundation for what is required to reach that level of engagement. So you have that now. Now let's focus in just a little bit on this secondary transition process. This word cloud represents the definition, according to IDEA, of secondary transition, and you'll just see some things that pop out in this word cloud. These are a lot of the words that we use as practitioners. This is what we think about. We think about the education, the transition, the employment, all of these words that are present in our word cloud. Sometimes when we present this information to families, it can be very complex, just like what is mentioned here in the IDEA definition for transition services. So if we know that this information can be a bit complex, then how are we breaking it down for our families? How are we taking secondary transition and going back to IDEA's definition to ensure that they understand it? But let's focus in on some of these keywords from the definition. So coordinated, results-oriented, improving academic, and that keyword and functional achievement. From school to post-school activities, strengths, preferences, interests. So how are we breaking that down to ensure that our families understand, leading to engagement, which will also lead to them being empowered? So when we think about coordinated, when something is coordinated, it's a common goal. It can sometimes be things that are complex that we then work together to show the relationship and how that comes together. And then if it's coordinated, it's logical. So, and then there's an order to it. So when we're bringing families along and helping them to really understand, going back to our definition of secondary transition, that it is coordinated. It is a coordinated set of activities, as you can see right here. So what we want to ensure that we have for families is to help them understand how all of this fits together, how everything that we are proposing, that we are discussing, it's going to fit, right? Because we really do want those outcomes that we talked about in the research that happens when we do this. So it's not done in isolation. It's not a one size fits all. It's that coordinated set of activities that we want to help our families to understand. And ultimately, we want our young people to be successful. So rather than it being this maze that can seem very difficult for families, we want to be able to break this down and help them to understand that when we're proposing the services and activities, this is why we're doing this as it relates to those post-secondary goals. But we do want them to understand how that does happen. And of course, results-oriented. Most practitioners know Stephen Covey's begin with the end in mind. We all think about this. Of course, we want our young people to not only graduate, as you see here in the picture, but we want them to be successful adults as well. We want them to have the skills that they need to achieve their post-secondary goals and beyond. So everything in this transition planning process, we have to ensure that our families understand we're looking at the long term. We're looking at the results. We're listening to our young people. We want to hear their voice. We want to know, what is it that our young people would like to achieve? And then we want to go back and make sure that we have the coordination there to get them where they would like to be. So again, showing that correlation, that connection to help families to understand that. We get a lot of questions about how do you discuss this at an early age? Because we know a lot of those decisions that are made at the elementary school can really impact a student's trajectory. Again, very important to share this information with families. Begin with the end in mind. Let's think about this. Let's talk about some of those discussions and some of those decisions that can likely be made at elementary that can impact our young people's trajectory. Improving those academic and functional achievement. Our families are sometimes pretty well versed in the academic pieces of this, okay? So they'll know about the goals that we're discussing and thinking about the academics, but sometimes they have lots of questions about the functional achievement, the skills needed for daily living, functional academics. But then there's also great opportunity for family participation in some of the functional academic pieces as well, for them to be able to reinforce some things. So we need to think about that as we're empowering them. How can we provide that wonderful information? Families reinforce it at home or reinforce it in the community. As our young people are engaging in athletic events or other events throughout the community, how can our families actually help us to reinforce some of those wonderful things that we're doing at school? So again, bringing them in as partners as we work to improve that academic and functional achievement for our students. Of course, if we are going to begin with the end in mind, as we are helping our families, we want to focus in on from school to post-school activity. We want all of these areas of education and training, employment, independent living, all of those things discussed with our families, but you have to ensure that they understand what those mean. So not just giving them post-secondary education, but let's talk about what does that look like? And how does that differ for all students? Okay. Remember, it's very individualized. And then post-secondary training. Let's open their eyes to see things and say, well, guess what's out there? Guess what's available? And then as practitioners, how do we learn more about what's available? Well, that last bullet here is the interagency collaboration. It's so important to make sure that that collaboration happens and to help our families to understand that some of our collaboration will occur and can only occur if they give permission for that to happen. But when that does happen and we have permission to collaborate, then that means that we can then start working again in partnership with our outside agencies to work on all of the goals that our young people have told us that they would like to achieve. At the bottom, you'll see a quote here from a parent out of the Engaging and Empowering Families in Secondary Transition book. And I think this is where we want to be. This is what we like to see happen. So this family member said, there are so many options available to Emily at this time. The school transition team has been open to many possibilities for her future and are taking her desires and wishes into consideration. They even opened my mind about the possibility of her learning to drive. That's what it's about. That's the collaboration. That's the preparation. That's helping our families to see beyond what they think is possible. That's helping them to dream big. That's helping our young people to dream big. You'll note here also that this parent felt like, okay, they're really considering what my child really wants to do. Her desires and wishes were being considered. And then the fact that maybe the parent did not think that a driver's license was a possibility. She may have only considered public transportation, if that's available in her area. But now the team possibly provided some new resources. And they've taught her a couple of things and probably actually engaged and will now have some additional interagency collaboration as they try to support Emily in possibly learning to drive. So from school to post-school is extremely important in making sure that we really understand the avenues that the child wants, but also the values of the family, and then helping them to see the resources and supports that will be there with them as well. This slide is also very important to note. As a practitioner, you want to make sure that your family members understand how things change at this point. So when we have that collaboration in school, you then have the case manager who's leading it all. The case manager is ensuring that the meetings are scheduled and reminders are sent and all of those things. On that adult services end, things change and it will look very different. So along this process of empowerment, you have to ensure that you are notifying, educating the families, the student, as to what that will look like and how that will change and how that ownership will now lay a little more on them as well. So throughout this process of school, you want to make sure that they are having the opportunity to be full partners in this, because there will be that post-school time where they will need to call and schedule those appointments and ask those questions and get all of those things done. So just ensure at this point that you are empowering families and letting them know how things will change. I added a little something here just because as practitioners, I'm sure most of you have heard SPIN. So instead of just the strengths, preference, and interest, I also included the needs here. And we usually refer to that as SPIN. It's so easy for our families to remember it as well. And so we think about it. how are we allowing the student to give us or tell us about their strengths? Are we focusing in on that as we have that course of study? What does that look like? The things that the student prefers, how do we know? How are we getting that information from our young people? What about those interests? How are we using them as in our education? What's happening there? And then, of course, we do want to discuss the needs. It's very important for our young people to know and to be able to advocate for themselves. And one of our wonderful resources that we have, not only as practitioners, but we also share this resource with families, is the I'm Determined tools, the I'm Determined website, where you'll find lots of videos, tools there. Families can actually use that. You will also find the PowerPoint template, where our young people can edit that and truly be involved in their education. And that can help our families to see how they are now building on those self-determination skills as well. And then, of course, the 9 elements here. So we want to make sure that as we are helping our families to really allow the student to take a leadership role in this, and they're learning from how their parents are engaging with our schools, that we are allowing the choice making, decision making, goal setting, and working with our young people through this. So again, what we are teaching to our families or empowering our families to do, our young people are watching, and it's actually modeling for them how then when they've reached that wonderful age of majority, for a lot of our young people, they will then have this responsibility to also be a little more involved in signing their IEPs to say that, yes, they do provide this consent. So it's very important as we are empowering, engaging our families. We also think about this for our students when they get to a certain point. This is going to be them. They will have the control of this situation as well. So let's try to bring this together. I mentioned a lot about empowering families because to me, that is exactly what engagement is. When we're engaging them, we are truly empowering them to be the partners that we know they want to be, because remember, they want the best for their child or their children. And so we want to empower families during the secondary transition process. When we look at empowering them, Virginia Tiered Systems of Supports, VTSS, is a wonderful resource. They have some great videos for practitioners to take a look at, but there's 6 components of family engagement really stand out to me. You will see here, positive relationships. We want those positive relationships. Let's go back to the beginning of this presentation when I talked about those relationships and family engagement, and we know the trust has to be there, right? So we want to build trust with our families to have those positive relationships with them. Now, we know that there will be times where you will have to, and conflict can arise, but it's about the communication, the collaboration, and still when you have those positive relationships, we can come to the table and have those discussions. We want to empower them. We want families to understand their rights. We want them to know what's involved in the secondary transition process. And then VTSS also talks about those leadership opportunities. So as we're bringing our families in and talking about secondary transition, are there also opportunities for these families to be leaders? Are there opportunities for them to share what they've learned about secondary transition with other families? And then database goals and outcomes, of course, those multi-tiered systems of supports. And then this last bullet, again, collaborative problem solving. If there are problems, if conflict does arise, what is that process? What does it look like to fully engage the families to help them to better understand, which leads right back to that second bullet of empowering families to be able to do that. So we want to move from to and embrace the with. So remember, when I mentioned we are moving from to talking to families or just giving information to families, and we want to embrace the with. We want to do things with families. So we want to think about it. All right, secondary transition is a broad topic, very broad topic. I often say secondary transition is everything, because almost everything I can find a way that it relates to secondary transition. So if we are truly embracing the with of family engagement and bringing our families along, we really do want to think about what are their needs. If we're having different webinars or different in-person events to give them information that they need, let's find out from them. What are some topics involved in secondary transition that you really do have questions about, that you really do need additional information on? Okay. Now, what about when we host these events, the locations of them? How can we find that information out? Is it difficult for families in one area of your county or your city to make it to these in-person events? Are all of your events held on Zoom? Does everyone have access to internet? And then, of course, multiple languages. What languages do your families require? What do they need? As we are moving to this with and empowering our families, what time are meetings being held? Do you get that information from your families to find out the time that works best for them? Again, doing this in collaboration and not just doing two. Dates for events, of course, and then feedback. So how are you finding out what you're doing with this? How is it going thus far? Anonymous surveys are a great way. And then again, you will see throughout this presentation, we are going to focus on the empowerment and of course the student, because again, the student will have this responsibility as soon as the age of majority, then it will only be on the student. But throughout the transition planning process, we want to ensure that we are including them to actually have their voice in everything that we do. And that is from an early age. So let's find out, what are Virginia's parents saying? What are their tips on transition planning? So we want to empower our families and engage our families. So it would behoove us to use information that Virginia's parents have told us. What are their tips? So we found out from them, they say, dream big. And I've mentioned that before in this presentation. That's what we want our families to be able to do in this secondary transition process. We want them to be able to research, look up that information, okay? Find out a little bit more about that program that your student possibly wants to attend. We also want them to think outside the box. Not just, oh no, we can't make that happen. What would it take if this is what this student is telling us that they're truly interested in? What are the resources and supports that could possibly help to make this happen? And then collaborate. That collaboration, not only with us as practitioners, but also with our outside agencies, and to understand the resources and supports that they can provide, so that after graduation, our families are not feeling like they're on this lone island alone, but that there are resources there and agencies to be able to assist them. Family involvement, and again, this came from the Virginia parents, what they were saying here, just being involved. And then, of course, student voice. Very important that the student has that voice. And then right in the center, we see student involvement. From that early age, using tools like I'm Determined to help our young people to be able to have that voice. To start with something maybe as simple as a one-pager, to bring that to the meeting the very first time and share that information. or to put it on a poster board and be able to share that. Just depending, there are multiple ways to actually individualize that process and what it could look like. And some of our students stay in their meetings for just a few minutes. Some of our students stay in their meetings the entire time. But just keeping that student involvement at the center for the greatest extent possible for our young people. Now, what are some questions that you can think about as a practitioner? Some sample questions that families often ask. The main question that we usually get is, what is secondary transition? And again, you saw that IDEA definition. And of course, we can always give our families that, but we need to be able to break down those key words to really help them understand what it's saying. The second one is, why is it important to begin thinking about secondary transition early in my child's academic career? A lot of those decisions that are made at the elementary level that can truly impact the child's transition. So we want to make sure that our families understand when they are making some of those decisions at the table, how it could possibly impact the trajectory of that child's academic career. What is my role in the secondary transition process? Parents and family members are extremely important to this process. We want them to understand how valuable they are, how much we appreciate them, how much we want to be in collaboration and partnership with them. And then we want them to understand how things that we are doing at school, we can help them to actually be able to reinforce that. That's what goes with that next bullet, supporting that child's secondary transition planning at home. We want them to be partners in this work. And then why is secondary transition important for my child? That goes back to really helping them to understand what it is, how this process helps, and what those outcomes can be. And what has the research shown us about those outcomes? What community agencies and resources are available? That's for now in school, but we also want to ensure that they have that information for post-school. How can my child be an active participant in the secondary transition process? That's probably one of our favorite questions as practitioners, because we want families to want their young people to really be involved in this process. And as I stated, the I'm Determined tools are just one resource for doing that. And lastly, to ensure that throughout this process, families understand what are graduation requirements. What is it going to take for my young person to be able to graduate? What does that look like? What are SOLs? What is a verified credit? What is a standard credit? All of those things that come with graduation and truly understanding substitute tests. What do all of those things mean? And how does that impact my child's ability to graduate with the standard or advanced diploma? Or is it that my child is actually graduating with an applied studies diploma? But to ensure that they fully understand those decisions. And again, when some of those decisions are made early on, how it can impact graduation and diploma status for our young people. So as practitioners, what are your indicators of success? And of course, this is a discussion that you would have at your school division level with your leaders, but you just want to think about it. How do we know if we're doing things right? How do we know if we're getting it right? So these are just a couple, again, from the Engaging and Empower Families in Secondary Transition book, couple of indicators of success. Families and students are able to describe the transition planning process and supports available. Again, that education that leads to empowerment. Families and students are active participants in the meeting. That's what we want. We want both. We want the student to be involved. We want the families to be active participants. We want to provide the space and the time for families to ask those questions. Oral and written communications are understandable by all. Again, there are times where we want to ensure that that information is in very parent, family friendly language, because the acronyms that we can use as practitioners, we understand those, but we want to ensure that everything that we are saying, that our families and our students really understand it. So we'll have to break that down and make that language very family friendly. And then providing that frequent communication with families, provided in multiple formats if needed, languages. So that communication and collaboration that is needed for a true partnership, that could be your indicator of success. But that's a question to take back to your team and discuss it. What are going to be your indicators of success? How will you know that you're doing this right, that you are engaging families of students with disabilities in the transition planning process? So at Video E, I do want to conclude the webinar with a couple of points. The annual survey for families of students with disabilities, again, as practitioners, share this information. It comes out annually. This is how we want to get this information from families, which will also provide you with valuable information from the families, because that information will be shared with school divisions. Families can complete the paper copies of the surveys that are mailed to the special education directors. They can also complete it online using the QR codes that you see here. This information, the surveys do change annually, so there will be new links and new QR codes every year, but that information is always presented to your special education directors, as well as it can be found on the Video E website. The families only complete one survey per child with an IEP. So if they have multiple children in Virginia's public schools with IEPs, they would want to complete one survey for each child. Again, this is an annual survey, so just look for it every year, and please encourage your families to complete this so we can get this valuable information from them and complete our Indicator 8 data. If you have additional questions about this topic or just family engagement in general, feel free to contact me at the address that you see here on the screen. You can contact me through email, or you can also use the phone number. I also ask that you follow us on Twitter for updates at VDOE_SESS. We use the hashtag Family Engagement Friday. Each Friday, I actually send out a tweet with information about family engagement, and it can be very valuable for you as practitioners, but also for your families. So again, if you are on Twitter for social media, please follow us for these Family Engagement Friday updates. And now I will turn it back over to Mrs. Tanya Gogita.
Thank you, Chiquita, for sharing your professional insight and expertise, and for sharing your recommendations to educators on engaging families in secondary transition through collaboration and preparation. This webcast, as well as a fast fact on this topic, is available on CTI's website at www.centerontransition.org. We also invite you to stay connected with us through our social media channels at Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you.